People of Reddit who married divorcees. At what point did you realize there might be a reason the other person divorced them? Story 1. This is secondhand, but it's a good one. About a year after I signed the divorce papers, divorced my ex-wife for cheating on me, I met the guy she'd cheated on me with. I actually didn't know him by sight, but apparently he'd seen a few pictures of me, like the ones in my bedroom. He walked up to me, introduced himself, and then started apologizing for being the one to break up my marriage. I was pretty much over it by then, but I was still pissed off enough to say something like, "Yeah, well, man, it wasn't like you were the only guy she was cheating on me with. I'm pretty sure she was with a dude named Brian the whole time she was with you." He got real quiet, apologized again, and then left. A few weeks later, someone told me that he had moved out and was in the process of divorcing her. I'll never know for sure if it was my telling him about the other man that was the tipping point for him, but I like to think it was. Edit. Yes, there was a Brian, not his real name, although it hardly matters. I knew about Brian from a friend, and plus she'd admitted that there had been others besides the guy I confronted her about. Why he felt the need to apologize, I have no idea. Seemed like a nice enough guy aside from the sleeping with another man's wife thing. Did I do it for revenge? Not really. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, mostly a knee response to an emotional situation. Sometimes you get to say the perfect cutting remark. Sometimes you think of it in the parking lot after the opportunity is lost. I got lucky and didn't say something like, "Ah, that's okay, man," and regret it for the rest of my life. I used to feel sorry about it because it might have broken up a marriage. But if that marriage wasn't built on trust to begin with, then chances are the infidelity was going to happen anyway. Or again, if you look at it that way. Story 2. I dated a divorcee for quite some time. She never told me she was divorced, which really wouldn't have bothered me. I ended up finding out about her past from one of the several people she was cheating on me with. Edit. My top comment is about the worst experience of my life. Woo. Story 3. When I woke up at 3 a.m. to pee and she was in the living room texting some dude, kinda went downhill from there. Edit. To answer questions. I asked her who she was texting. She said some guy she met while out with girlfriends. I then asked if something was going on. She swore that she was not cheating, but that she found him intriguing. Big flag there, because that's how she described me when we first met. So I snooped her internet history on her computer over the next couple days. She had been looking him up on Facebook, had directions to his house, and had done various searches on various "am I pregnant" terms. There's a lot more to it, but from there, it was lots of yelling, threatening, and ultimately lawyers and divorce. To this day, she swears she didn't cheat, but she's the type of person where everything bad that happens is not her fault. Story 4. A friend's parents got divorced when she was in high school. They'd been together nearly 20 years, but they argued constantly. After they got divorced, her dad bought the other half of the duplex they lived in and became best friends with her mom. They went out to dinner several nights a week, never fought over what to do with the kids, helped each other with bills. They just dated other people too. My friend said she wished they would have done that years ago. Story 5. My husband had an engagement that ended before we met, and the reasons always seemed weird to me. Something about her trying to get rid of their dog and getting into a huge fight with his mom when she made a snarky comment about the dog thing, and then getting her mom and sister to call and harass his mom about the fight. Big, ridiculous argument that ended with them deciding they weren't going to work out. They'd been together for like 4 years. Now I completely get it. Well, not the part with her mom and sister, but the rest of it. The dog was awful, peed everywhere, was very dominant and aggressive, like biting, drawing blood aggressive at times, and old enough that he was very difficult to train since they hadn't done about it when he was a puppy. The dog now lives with my mother-in-law because it's not safe to have him in a home with babies. And my mother-in-law is a fucking nightmare, but my husband and his ex saw her multiple times a week, whereas we see her once every couple of months. At one point, about a year in, we had a big argument where I told him we were heading down the same path as them if he didn't get his together, and that if you have the same problems with 2 long-term relationships in a row, you need to consider that you're part of the problem, and that I was out if he didn't set serious boundaries with his mom and get some training for the dog. Fortunately, it was apparently a wake-up call because that was 7 years ago, and neither is an issue. Story 6. I briefly dated a divorcee, till a common friend told me he was still married and often used that as a sympathy card to get women. Edit. Since this has gotten some attention, I'll clarify. This guy is 26. He got married very young to a woman 7 years older than him, and apparently instantly regretted it. He had been building up the marital trouble story for a while now, and recently started telling everyone at work he got a divorce. I work with him and had no reason to doubt it. Unfortunately for him, I am good friends with someone in his university circle who knows his wife very well. When I found out, I confronted him, and he started claiming he was in love with me and hadn't had the courage to ask his wife for a divorce yet, but would do it soon. Pretty much the exact same line he had used on another girl a few weeks ago. Story 7. I'm a divorcee who dated a divorcee. He got shit-faced drunk on his B-day and told me, "I see why your husband left you," right after I'd given him a $250 watch he'd been wanting. I eventually left because A, I realized he was a rebound that had lasted way too long, and B, he was going to eventually kill someone with his drinking and driving, and I really didn't want it to be me. Edit. Yes, I got the watch back and returned it. I understand that $250 might not be a lot for a watch, but at that time, $250 was a lot for me. I wasn't making that much and was living off student loans. I basically saved extra dollars from my paychecks until I could afford it. Edit 2. I posted this when I was still groggy from sleep. I apologize for not including context. It was my ex-boyfriend's birthday. He was the guy I dated after divorcing husband. We had planned to go to a strip of bars. I figured we should get an Uber so we don't have to bum a ride. At that point, I was trying to keep him from drinking and driving as much as possible. Yes, I had reported him to the cops on 2 other occasions, but I didn't know his license plate number, and as far as I know, they never caught him. To be honest, I was still hurting from the divorce and was clinging to what I subconsciously knew was a bad situation. Either way, we Ubered to the bars and met up with friends. He got very drunk. I asked the bartenders to cut him off, but he just got other people to buy him drinks. So, closing time comes around, and he tells me he wants to get food with his friend. His friend, who is driving, is only slight more sober than. I tell no way and try to get him to Uber. I tell him we can order food and just be comfy at home. He's not going for it. I finally tell him that I legitimately do not feel safe getting into a car with that guy. It's at this point that he starts yelling at me, telling me that I'm killing his buzz, I'm ruining his birthday, and that he sees why my husband left me. It hurt. A lot. He wound up getting in the car with his friend and leaving me there. I was in a popular area, so it wasn't hard to find a friend to pick me up. The next morning, he claimed he didn't remember. I dumped his and asked for the watch back. Story 8. Little different, I guess. My widowed mom started dating a guy in her Sunday school class who was recently divorced. Very quiet but nice. Her friends in the class told her that he was never home, always hunting or at work, but that he was a nice man, warning her but not scaring her off. He and mom got married. Still very quiet, but again, nice. Turns out he was just depressed. His wife of 25 years had been cheating on him with the same guy for at least half that time. He worked all the time, or went on hunting trips with friends, as he just didn't want to be at home. Mom told him that it was too bad he couldn't retire so they could just enjoy their time together. He was 50, mom was 53. He said he could retire, and did so. They spent the next 20-plus years having a great time, traveled extensively, just enjoying each other's company. They had a great marriage before he passed away, missed by all of us. Sometimes the divorce is 100% the fault of one party. Just because you divorced doesn't mean you were a failure. Story 9. My parents are divorced and both got remarried. My mom found it beneficial to attend a divorce care group at her church. She ended up going out with the guy who ran the group and seemed like a great dude. When I asked her about him, she told me he had been divorced himself 2 separate times himself already, which was a pretty huge red flag to me, but apparently not to her. Fast forward 12 years and he's been unbelievably emotionally abusive to her. There was also a point when my brother and I were teenagers where we literally weren't allowed to live with him anymore because he felt threatened he wasn't the man of the house. She says she's happy still, which is truly all I want for her. But it's pretty frustrating when a 13-year-old can see the red flags my 40-plus-year-old mother couldn't. Story 10. I had my wife cheat on me, ended up meeting someone who was perfect, and just thought I had hit the karma jackpot. She liked literally all the same things as me. When I asked about her past, I'd hear stories of what sounded like abuse. But it was always implied, like I was so scared I thought he was going to hit me. Then one night she went mental on me, started getting mad about me wanting to visit my daughter who was in the hospital. She wanted to go on a date instead, started throwing glass at me and it was like rain. Went to get away and she came after me and clawed the out of the back of my neck, then yanked me backwards by my collar where I ended up on top of her. I pushed her away and just got out. She called and started threatening me. Since I had hit her, in falling on her, my options were come back to the house or she would call the cops and report me for abuse. I hung up on her and called the cops instead. By the time the cops showed up, she had bruises on her neck. She self-inflicted them to claim I had done it. Just hadn't called the cops yet. My hands showed no signs of aggressive force. Plus, the back of my neck earned her a trip to prison. It was at that point I realized how duped I was. I knew she was the reason for her previous divorce. I think this question implies any divorced person is flawed. That isn't fair. If you ever dated and broke up with someone, you are in the same exact boat. Divorce just often gets messy because there is legal follow-up. Story 11. My ex of about 2-ish years was in the process of a divorce when we met. His wife was crazy, and the reason for everything wrong in his life? This should have been my first clue to GTFO, but I was young. Eh? You live and learn? He had kids, and I would go to sporting events for them, and his ex-wife would be there the vast majority of the time too. We started to get along, and he hated that. I didn't get that. Wouldn't it be easier for the kids if her and I had a good relationship? Oh no! We would compare notes on him, and it would ruin our relationship. We quite literally never talked about him. My eyes started to open here. I was using his computer once and his Google Calendar opened, and there was an event on Valentine's Day the next week, which he had told me we were not doing anything for due to money, which of course was his ex's fault. So I opened it. Okay, shouldn't have been snooping. And the event was, Day Ex-Girlfriend Broke My Heart. Now this ex of his was prior to his 20-year relationship with his now ex-wife. So I figured out that he never let anything go. Apparently, ever. A couple months later, our relationship was staring to decline on its own. He went over to a friend's house without me, in the middle of a planned date night, and I didn't care that he left. I was mad he took the dog, though. We got in a fight and he told me I was starting to sound like his ex-wife, to which I responded, if we are saying the same exact things and are such different people, don't you think the issue is you? I realized at that exact moment that he was a narcissistic who was never going to change or grow up. I moved out a week later. I still miss the dog. TLDR. A million little things finally connected in my mind, and I realized he was narcissistic and manipulative. 7 years later, and I would still love to sit down with his ex-wife and hear her side of the story. Edit. I just feel I need to clarify that I was not friends with his ex-wife. We were friendly and were cordial to each other. We only ever made small talk and conversed about the kids, and my ex-boyfriend was always present during our conversations. He was just stewing over the fact that we didn't hate each other. That said, I miss the kids too, but I admittedly miss the dog more. Story 12. When we had a kid. My husband has always been a workaholic. It didn't cause too many problems when it was just us, but was a lot harder to manage once we became parents. It's easy to feel like you're doing all of the work, and I started resenting my husband. My husband and his ex-wife had 2 kids close in age. She was essentially a single parent to them throughout the day. He did cut back his hours slightly when our relationship started to suffer, and even that was a lot. I understood why the divorce happened. I considered it at points during the relationship. Edit. What is with the ridiculous assumptions? I never said I was a stay-at-home mom. I was also working. We were very ready for our son. We were in our 40s when we adopted him. He was planned, wanted, and we could easily afford to have a child. Even with cutting his hours, we were still able to afford our high-rise in Manhattan. He didn't have to work as much as he did. He just didn't know any different. I wasn't taking my husband's paycheck, and we didn't have a child we couldn't afford. You make one comment on Reddit and everyone thinks they know your life. Ridiculous. I also feel the need to add that I never said I would have preferred my husband to be addicted to drugs or alcohol. All I said was that it was hard on our marriage and I understood the reason behind the divorce. Before having a kid, I didn't understand what the big deal was. When I was coming home after a long day of work to take care of our son by myself, I understood. Story 13. Married to a divorcee. I realized with my very first interaction with his ex-wife. She is a controlling, delusionally self-important asshat who ended up cheating and then divorcing. I'm surprised he wasn't the one to file for divorce, but I had my share of bad relationships in the past too. My husband is lovely. Story 14. Didn't actually marry the divorcee I dated, but came close. Fortunately, I realized beforehand that she was completely selfish. Everything was always about what she wanted, and she found subtle ways to devalue anything I wanted, or that was good for me. She also had been hiding a bad temper from me, which came out finally toward the end. After the breakup, she tried spreading lies about me to all our mutual friends to make herself look better. Fortunately, most of them were aware enough to realize what she was doing. Definitely dodged a bullet. Story 15. Woo. Okay. Story time. So my mom just got divorced from my dad my senior year of high school. She has always been the kind of person to be in a relationship, so she started immediately dating around, since my dad cheated on my mom multiple times. She met this guy on POF, who we're going to call Tom. Tom was a successful marketing guy with no kids, a steady income, and was divorced because his wife cheated on him. Early in the relationship, my mom gets a message from Tom's ex-girlfriend, current boyfriend. She says that she needs to tell her some things about Tom, but my mom ignores her. A year goes by and Tom seems normal. She moves in with him and so do we since he has 2 spare bedrooms. He's a cool guy who seems chill and really nice. He'll sometimes go through my mom's phone, she told me, but she thought that all the good things outweighed the bad. Cut to election day, where things aren't going so well for my mom and Tom since they're both liberal. They drink, and Tom throws a remote at the window. He calls the police on himself. My mom forgives him. This is where things start to get weird. Tom starts acting crazier towards my mom, mostly via text message. On Christmas Day, she decides that we don't want to go to his sister's house because she's drunk. We open the trunk to his car to get the presents out and he drives away, with stuff flying out the back. He apologizes. My mom is super weary at this point. Cut to New Year's where Tom is out of town. She texts him that she wants to break up with him because he's saying that it's my autistic brother's fault that the carpet on the stairs is falling apart. He says, "Get your fucking kids out of my house." So the next day, we have 8 people come over to move the furniture, that's my mom's, while he threatens us over the phone. That was in January. Over the next few months, and still to this day, he sends crazy threatening messages to my mom. He also found out where we live so he could take the shared BMW that they owned jointly and sell it, even though my mom has been begging him to take it. She finally gets in contact with the lady's boyfriend at the beginning of the story. They share stories and she apologizes for not listening sooner. TLDR. My mom dated a normal divorcee who turned out to be a complete psychopath. Story 16. Hoo boy. Where to start? When I initially asked him why they divorced, his response was that she turned into a bitter person, gained 120 lbs, and was taking money without talking about it first. They weren't very well off at first, and she ended up ghosting him after draining their joint account. We have both joint and separate accounts, 5 years into a relationship and 4 years after moving in together. We have a kid together. When I withdraw money from the joint account, he forgets about it, then has a sticker shock reaction upon checking the account balance. It's definitely draining, but keeping post-it notes on our closet mirror helps to remind him so he doesn't flip out about it. He had horrible eating habits before we met, and his mother said he was always that way. We both have high metabolisms, but when we're tired and it's dinner time, my idea of a quick meal is tuna salad and fruit, while his is a double quarter pounder. I can see how she got lazy about her eating habits. He gets very burned out at his job and often gives up after work on cooking healthy. He's a lot better about it now since we have kids and that won't fly anymore. He's also pretty cynical, but so am I. She didn't know how to take a joke, was constantly overanalyzing everything he said and taking everything personally, even if it wasn't meant to be. I can understand that too if you're not used to and like that type of personality. We all have our quirks, and I love him more every single day. Sometimes personalities just don't match, and that's okay. Stealing someone's life savings and indirectly forcing them to file bankruptcy after losing a house to foreclosure by lying about making house payments, though. Fuck you, Stacy. That hurt him. Everything else I can forgive you for. I can even thank you for leaving him, but you for making him start over. Story 17. My ex had been married previously and his wife commits suicide. When I met him, I assumed his late wife must have had a lot of problems with depression or something and didn't think he had any impact on her decision at all. It took me a year and 8 months to leave him. He was emotionally and verbally abusive. He became angry easily. He would make hurtful jokes and then say I was being too sensitive and that he's just a blunt person, so deal with it. Now, I know a person's suicide cannot be entirely due to someone else because it is ultimately that person's decision. But in that year and 8 months, I realized it's feasible she ended her life because of his emotional issues impacting their relationship. I realize now that I began dating him with the idea I could save him. Some introspection and reading has helped me get over my savior complex. Save yourself. Edit. For those asking, The Art of Letting Go, The Path to Inner Freedom is a good book on overcoming codependent behaviors. Also, just looking for info on codependent behaviors brings up a wealth of resources on Google. I'm still struggling with being codependent, but overcoming it is a daily practice, not necessarily a cure it and it's gone thing. Edit 2. Wow, I got gold. This is my first gilded comment. Thanks. My ex never acknowledged his behavior and always blamed me, so it means so much just to know that other people can relate and to know that I wasn't just overreacting. Also, I'm at work, so I can't respond as quickly to everyone as I'd like. Story 18. I dated a divorcee for a hot sec. She was actually a really wonderful lady, but she obviously had some lingering feelings about how things had gone with her ex. The first time this came up was, one night we were at a bar, and I ended up in a fairly intense, fun conversation about music with the male bartender. She got weirdly upset about this and started dropping lines like, well, maybe you just want to go home with him, and it's obvious you guys are into it. A bit later, when she found out my brother is gay, she got weirdly passive-aggressive and started saying enough offensive things that I eventually broke up with her. Turns out her ex-husband left her for a man. Story 19. My wife and I are both divorcees, and we're pretty acutely aware of each other's flaws beforehand. She actually lived with me and my ex for a while when I was still with the ex. She hadn't been divorced that long at the time. We just rest safely in the knowledge that our flaws fit each other better than they did with our exes. Story 20. This isn't about me, but it's kind of funny. I used to work with this in-house mechanic, kind of a weird, quirky guy. He was married for 14 years, got divorced, met another divorced woman, and has been in love ever since. He said they were both treated like in their former marriages and are grateful to have one another. I remember him telling me when he was with his ex, he drank a lot. He'd leave work on his lunches and down a few bottles of Mickey's. One day, he was walking to the liquor store when he realized instead of buying alcohol, he could be spending his money on a gun. He stopped drinking ever since. Story 21. Obligatory, not me, but my divorced aunt and uncle. My mom's brother married my ex-aunt despite everyone telling them it was a bad idea. They moved to the East Coast and had 2 kids, both on the autistic spectrum. This is relevant. Their daughter is the oldest and higher functioning, but her little brother is nonverbal. My uncle was a stay-at-home dad, while my ex-aunt worked. Eventually, she divorces him and kicks him out of the house. At this point, she had both kids. My uncle is convinced that he's the only one who can properly take care of his son and wants to fight for custody. Having been unemployed for so long, he can only find shitty retail work that doesn't pay a livable wage. He sleeps on a friend's couch for a long time, but they eventually give him a deadline to move out. So he's in a pretty pitiable situation. My mom is pretty worried about her brother and her nephew, so my dad suggests that we help out. My dad has a well-paying, stable job, and one of my sisters was at college, so we had an extra room. Plus, I could share with my other sister to make more room for his son. We could definitely afford to support him for a few months while he finds a better job and gets custody of his son. Holy, this fucking guy. Literally every sound he makes is ear-splitting. Talking, whispering, sneezing, spitting out his fucking toothpaste. Imagine being woken up by a cartoonish Peteway from across the house. This guy has zero self-awareness. Actually, no, he was aware. He was just aware of all the wrong things. He could tell he was putting a strain on our lives, but instead of listening to how we needed him to help, he would help in his own ways. He would do our laundry despite us telling him not to. He destroyed several items of clothing that didn't belong in the dryer. My sister once asked him to carry over a bucket of water for our chickens. Should have taken him 1 minute. 10 minutes later, he comes back to her with no bucket, asking her to move her car so he could use our truck to drive the water over. This is a grown, able-bodied man. And then there's his parenting. He had his son for visitation while he negotiated custody. His ex-wife only wanted custody to spite him. She didn't actually want to take care of him. I don't know how this kid doesn't have diabetes yet. We were the only ones enforcing a healthy diet and not just pizza and crescent rolls for this kid. And it was a hassle. This is a 2-year-old in a 10-year-old's body. He had frequent accidents, but my uncle wouldn't clean them up properly, leaving both of their rooms smelling like human. There's so much more, but the absolute worst thing was that those few months became 2 years. Instead of looking for a better job, he does have a degree in experience, so it wasn't impossible. He got another retail job and refused to leave because he was friends with the boss. Never mind that it would never pay enough to support him and his son. He couldn't burn such a valuable bridge, so even after getting custody of his son, he continued to leech off of us. It broke my heart to see my mother slowly lose respect for her brother. Eventually, my parents had enough and gave him a couple months to get out. He still doesn't have his own house. He moved into another family-owned property so he could keep his low-paying job. His ex-wife might have been crazy, but any sane person would have divorced him. Story 22. Absolutely never. I married a 3-time loser when she was 32 and I was 27. We dated for 6 months, and the marriage was going strong when she died 38 years later. Problems? Sure, we had a lot, but we knew enough about each other before marriage make it work through those problems. Story 23. I have dated 3 divorced girls in the past. The first one, too young to marry, so it was a natural progression for her to get divorced. The second one, divorced happened cause the guy cheated on her. I didn't date her long enough to come up with a reason to say, so that's why. No, about the third one. Oh my fucking god. She was possessive, obsessed, jealous, manipulative, and so smart that most of the times, she made it seem it was normal. Thank God I opened my eyes and saw her for what she really was, and totally understood why her marriage and post-date life was a failure. Funny thing is that now I'm dating a new divorced woman, but this one got divorced cause she is a very successful and hard-working woman, which made her former husband be a bit jealous and competitive. What's more, the fact that she didn't want to have kids made it all the worse. But with me, it's going perfectly fine since we are so different work-wise. She's the client manager of an automotive company, I'm an English teacher, photographer, brewer, musician. Story 24. I just proposed to mine 2 days ago after 5 years together. I cannot find the reason why any sane man wouldn't have shot everyone else to stay with her. I'll report back after the next 5 years. She's crazy, but she's my kind of crazy. Note to you youngins. They are all crazy. Find the one that works for you. Story 25. I knew why from early on. He has some of the outdated views on women that many Russian immigrants have, and I'm sure they were much, much worse 20 years ago. And more importantly, he's a workaholic who has a bad habit of using work to hide from unpleasant conversations. He still does this, but I have a similar enough job that I know his work and know when he really does have a deadline on tomorrow is when looking to tell his coworkers no and come home to help me out. She wanted a husband with a knife, which he will never be. His mother is convinced that no one is good enough for her baby boy, and he doesn't stand up to her. The only reason this isn't a major problem for us is that she lives across the country. Beyond that, his ex hit him regularly, convinced him that he would never be able to make a woman happy, and convinced him that he was a pervert for wanting. In conclusion, I'm pretty sure he was a shitty husband to her. But he's great to me, and none of that justifies being an abusive. Story 26. Well, I didn't marry him, but my ex-boyfriend was divorced, and he made it seem like his ex-wife was a total. He said that he gave everything to her, even quit his job to move to Georgia with her. They both previously lived in Minnesota. He said he had paid for all of her bills and makeup and clothes and even paid for couples trips, and she took a different guy with her on a lot of them, leaving her husband behind. The marriage ended when she went on a trip to New Orleans with her friends and didn't come back. About a couple weeks into our relationship, he began to get extremely possessive over me. I figured it was because he had been through so much with his last relationship, so I tried to overlook some of it, but it got so intense that he printed out a list of rules that I was to obey, which I obviously refused to accept. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without telling him. He had to have visual evidence of my work schedule. It was ridiculous. So, logically, I broke up with him. But he was relentless. He kept showing up at my house and work, and it was just embarrassing. Finally, I threatened to get a restraining order and he left me alone. A few months later, I get a Facebook message from this random woman who is asking me if I'm okay. I'm like, yeah, why? Like, who are you, you know? It turns out that she was the crazy ex-wife, except that they were never really married. They were dating for a bit, and when she refused to let him pay her rent, he bought the house from the owner and would not accept her rent money. He bought a lot of trip tickets and used his key to go into his house to put them on her coffee table. She never went on any of the trips. She moved, but he found her apartment and would leave love letters in her mailbox. He threatened her friends on Facebook, forbidding them from stealing her from him. Finally, she got her own restraining order and moved far away. So yeah, this still creeps me out because sometimes I get a feeling that he's stalking me, but I know it's probably just paranoia. Story 27. Pretty soon, it was clear that his first wife was just a bad fit, and he wasn't really into her enough. She was his first real girlfriend, and she did all the relationship management. She was wild about him, and she was the one who said when they were boyfriend to girlfriend, when it was time to move in together, when it was time to get married, etc. I think he just thought this is how relationships worked. Women were always more into it than men. Women make the decisions and you go along with it. I think he also loved how crazy about him she was, even if it wasn't totally mutual. But she was also very demanding, which is not something that works well for him. He was not too different with me than with her, to be honest, and I did find it frustrating. Even as full-grown adults, it took him maybe a year before he would refer to me as his girlfriend, and we dated for 8 years before we decided to get married, which is a long time when you're in your 30s. Many times I had to think, can I just be patient and wait because he's worth it? Or should I bail and find someone who is more focused on what he really wants and can go for it? The choice I made is obvious. But it wasn't easy always waiting and doing things on his timeline. But I know that you can't rush people or make these kinds of decisions for them. We actually did break up after dating for about 9 months because he was so slow about these things. He always seemed ambivalent. This was pretty soon after his divorce. Maybe too soon, I now realize. He even said a number of times that he wanted to be able to make the type of committed promises I asked, but just felt unable. So I moved on. Or so I thought. We broke up for a year, and I dated other people, but my ardor for him only increased rather than reduced. Still, I am not sure if we would have gotten back together if our paths hadn't crossed twice by luck. The first time we had hooked up, but I thought of it as a for old time's sake sort of thing. But then we bumped into each other again and it was just fireworks. Still, I thought I would leave that as another lost weekend. But a few weeks later, I called him and asked him out deliberately. We spent every weekend together for months before we decided to talk about what was really happening. Over the year we had been apart, he had recovered a lot and was way more ready to be in a committed relationship, though it was still slow going. As for me, I had also sort of cooled my jets on that one. I missed him, and I realized I'd rather have him slowly than not at all.